Hello, this is Johnny Gohara. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Amulet Technologies, and I want to welcome everyone to Part 1, a series of webinars on how to design and control an IoT device. First, let me introduce you to Brian Dieters. He's our firmware engineer who will be covering over the agenda, followed by Sam Billett, who's our field applications engineer.
Let's see. Looking at the agenda now. We're going to first look at a system overview of the Amulet system in general, and then we're going to get right into GEMstudio and talk about widgets and start playing around with laying out a GUI, laying out your user interface. And then we're going to talk about internal RAM and how you can use that to read sensor information and write data to some host with the Amulet standard Amulet drawn widgets. And then we're going to give it a facelift after that using some graphics from a designer, some nice looking graphics. And after we give it a facelift, we're going to actually start to write some code that gives it a little more complex functionality. But shouldn't be, we're not going to get into much detail in the code, so don't worry about that. But you should be able to follow it pretty easily. After that, we'll wrap it up. And again, anytime you have questions, please type it in the Skype chat. If Johnny can't answer it directly, he'll ask us and interrupt us, and should be good to go. Let's start with the system overview real quick. Just Amulet chip there, the LCD displays, and also reads the touch panel information and abstracts all of that away from the user, from the host processor. The host processor talks to the Amulet system over usually a UART or USB channel. There's some other ones as well. On some of our boards we have 485 or R232 or I2C or SPI that are also available. But the point is that the channel is very lightweight, very few wires. You're not sending image data. You're not sending large amounts of data. You're sending back and forth sensor data or action data for what the user wants to do. Anyway, let's move on. That's the system in general. Let's jump into GEMstudio, and Sam's going to take it away with starting to create a GUI from scratch.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Sam Billett. I'm an FAE with Amulet Technologies, and I'll be leading the webinar today on the introduction to GEMstudio. So this webinar will have two parts again. The first half will be an introduction to the GEMstudio widgets, and the second half will be a tutorial of GemScript. So to start off, let's create a new project. So I'm going to click Create a new GEMstudio project. And we want to create a project for the 4.3 capacitive module. So I'm going to scroll down to the 4.3 capacitive and click OK. This brings us to the first screen we see when we open a new project. We have our first page here, which is blank. Every object you add to this page here will show up exactly the same way when you program it onto your Amulet module. So what you see is what you get. And the objects in GEMstudio Pro are called widgets. Widgets are input-output objects, and so this includes things like buttons or sliders, which accept user touch as an input, and it also includes things like string fields and graphs, which display data. So let's try adding a widget to our page. I'm going to go to the plus icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, highlight widgets, and I'm going to add a slider to our project. So this will add a slider widget to our page. I can move it around by clicking on it and dragging it, and I can resize it by clicking on one of the corners and dragging those. So one of the features of GEMstudio is the simulation or the gem player, and this allows you to simulate what your user interface would look like when you program it onto the Amulet module. So we can launch that simulation right now by clicking the Run button in the bottom right hand corner of the screen right here. And this launches the simulation, and we can interact with our slider already, and we can see that it's working. So good. So we can close out of the simulation now. And now that we have a widget that can control something, so the slider sets a numeric field or numeric value depending on the position of the handle on the slider track. So let's add a widget which can display a numeric value. And the widget we'll add to do that is the numeric field widget. So once again, I'll go to the plus button in the bottom left hand corner, highlight widgets, and add a numeric field. I can just move that around, put it right next to the slider. Let me drag it to resize it a bit. So when you click on a widget, the parameters for the widget show up in the left-hand side of the screen. So we have parameters like the border, which is set to 0 right now because there is no border around our field. We also have parameters like font. So we can change the font by just clicking on that parameter and change it to something bigger, easier to see, like Arial 14. And if you had a question about any of these parameters, you could just highlight the parameter you're interested in finding more information about, say printf, and then click F1. And this will bring up the context-sensitive help. So we had printf selected, and now the help menu that opens brings us right to the information about printf. So I'm going to close out of the help right now. You can also get to the help using the help toolbar and clicking User's Guide, or by clicking Control-H. So now that we have our slider and our numeric field on the page, we need some way for our slider to control the numeric field. So to do that, we changed the href parameter. The href parameter allows you to enter functions which interact with other widgets and the Amulet hardware. So clicking on the href parameter opens a dialog box where we would enter those functions. A feature of the href parameter, or the dialog box that opens, is the auto completion. So by pressing tab, we open up a list of our options for functions. So I want to control the numeric field, so I'm going to arrow down to Amulet document referring to the current page we are on. I can click tab, and then click tab again to see the options for widgets. I'm going to select my num field 1.
So those names, those are the default names given to the widgets. And you can see those. Sam can highlight those. Yeah, those are just the default names.
So I can press tab one more time, and I want to set the value of the numeric field. So I'm going to use the set value method. And then I want to set it using the intrinsic value of the slider. So the slider has right now a min value and a max value of 0 and 255. And when the handle is on the far left of the track, it will set a value of 0, and then on the far right, 255. So it just scales between these min and max values. So once again, we can run the simulation to see our widgets working in action. And I can scroll up and down, and the numeric field is, or the slider is setting the value of the numeric field. So all the way to the right, 255, all the way to the left, 0. So I'm going to close out of that. We had a slider set the value of the numeric field. We could have also done this a different way. We could have the slider set the value of a variable and then have the numeric field display the variable. So we're going to go ahead and do that, and the variables we're going to use are the Amulet internal RAM variables. So Amulet internal RAM is a feature of GEMstudio and the Amulet hardware. It's virtual dual port memory, meaning that the Amulet can access and modify those variables as well as your host processor.
So this is where you'd poke in your sensor values and things that you'd want to send to display from your host. And these variables are persistent, so they'll stay until you change them or reset the system.
So we'll have our slider. We'll change the href parameter once again. We'll just delete what we had. And this time we are going to tab to Amulet internal RAM. Press tab again, and this brings up a list of the options for internal RAM. We have byte values, color values, string values, and string variables, and word variables. And the other functions here are internal RAM methods you can use. So we want the slider to set the value of a byte variable, so we're going to use byte 0. And once again, we want the slider to use the intrinsic value to set the byte variable. So I'm going to click Done here. And now I need the numeric field to display that same byte 0 variable. So I'm going to click the href parameter of the numeric field. Once again, tab to autocomplete. I want to use byte Amulet internal RAM byte 0, and this time I just want to show the value of the variable. So I'm going to click Done, and once again we can run our simulation, and we'll see that our slider and numeric field are doing the same thing, but doing it in a different way, using the variables this time.
Also made it from closed loop to open loop. The slider is setting the variable as you slide the handle, but the numeric field is only reading the value at a certain rate, called the update rate. So it's a polling-based system. Showing it right there, the update frequency. So every is in seconds. So every 200 milliseconds, that numeric field looks at the internal RAM and to check if it's changed, and if it has, it automatically draws the new number.
So now that we have our two widgets on the page, we can do something a little bit more interesting. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we're going to be creating color pickers. So our color picker will use 3 sliders, so we'll add 2 more sliders to control the red, green, and blue color channels of another widget we add to our page. So the first thing we're going to do is add the other widget, which will display the color we've selected with our sliders. So the widget we're going to add is the bar graph widget. So once again, going to the plus button in the bottom left-hand corner, highlight widgets, and I'm going to add a bar graph. So a bar graph is normally used to display data which is best represented as a percentage, like a fuel gauge on your car dashboard, because it has min and max parameters, and whatever value you set to the bar graph will show up as a percentage of the value between these min and max values, and then it will display as the ratio of fill color to border or to background color. So if I set this bar graph right now to a value of 200, it would be primarily this fill color, black, and if I set it to value of 0, it would be completely white. So we just want to use the background color to display the color of our color picker. So we are going to once again use Amulet internal RAM. So for the background color, I'm going to use the internal RAM color variables, this time using the shorthand of AIR for Amulet internal RAM, .c for color. I'm going to use the color variable 0. And so now the whole background is, or both the fill and the background are black. So now we need our sliders to be able to set the color channels of this internal RAM color variable. So to do that, we're going to once again go to the href parameter of our slider. So I'll open that up. And it's possible to have multiple functions in the href parameter as long as you separate them by commas. So every time this href triggers, all the functions that are comma separated will execute. So I want to set the, once again, the internal RAM color variable 0. And I'm going to use a internal RAM method setRed. This will set the red channel of color 0 to the intrinsic value of the slider. And once I have the color set, I also want my bar graph to update and refresh and show that new color. So I'm going to add a function Amulet document. Again, document referring to the page we are on. Bar graph, this was the default name given to the bar graph we added, and refresh. Good, so I'm going to click Done here, and we can do a quick simulation to see what it's doing right now. So as we move our slider all the way to the right, we get a strong red color value, and then all the way to the left, we remove all the red from that color so it's completely black. So now we need 2 more sliders to change the green and blue channels. Instead of going to the plus button again, I can make use of what's already on the page and duplicate this slider I already have. To do that, I can click on the slider and click Control D. I'll do that twice, and that duplicates my slider. Now, up to this point, I've also been moving widgets around just by clicking on them and dragging them around. When you have multiple widgets, there's more efficient and easy to use ways to align and organize them, and that is to use these alignment buttons at the top of the toolbar area here. So we have a center justify. This is similar to how you might center your text on a Microsoft Word document. So clicking that, it lines them up or centers them. And then I also don't want them to be all on top of each other, so I'm going to fan them out, and I can use this distribute space vertically alignment option, and that separates them so they're not all on top of each other. So now I also need to duplicate my numeric field, so I'll pretty much do the exact same thing. Click on the numeric field, click Control D twice to duplicate it, select all 3 of those fields, center them using the alignment button, and space them out vertically. Alright, so and now we've duplicated our sliders and our numeric fields, but right now they're still doing the same thing, changing the red color channel. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the href of the new sliders and numeric fields and change them so they change the appropriate color.
And the internal RAM byte.
And the internal RAM byte.
You want each one to set a different RAM byte. And while Sam's doing that, I just wanted to explain, he's separating them with commas to make sure they all happen at once, but you can also separate commands with semicolons, and that creates a state machine in which successive calls to that href call the next function in the state machine. Which is handy for tracking states of like up and down states of a button. You can have different commands for the up state and the down state if it was a toggle style button. Also, just href, the word, it means hypertext reference, which is a throwback to HTML, which is where Amulet's roots were. So if you're familiar with any HTML, href might be a little familiar to you, but it just means function.
So now we have our numeric fields and our sliders updated to the right href functions, but we've got these numbers kind of just floating over here. So let's add something so that we can make sense of what these mean. So to do that, I'm going to click on my numeric fields and add something to the printf parameter. So the printf parameter is similar to the printf in C. We have the already set is the this %3i, indicating that it is expecting to display the value that it gets in a 3-digit integer, and so anything I type around it, so say I wanted to show that it's the red color channel, any text I add will just show up that same way.
Before or after the percent identifier.
So I can go ahead and, this is green. And then I want to add same for the blue. All right, now we've added everything we need to our color picker, so let's run the simulation again. So right off the bat, at the values of, or median color channel values, we get a gray value here, but moving the red, say, all the way up and the blue all the way up, we get the combination of red and blue, which is kind of a magenta. Or say we wanted red and green, and we get yellow. So we can see that our colors are adding the way we would expect them to. Everything all the way to the right, we get white. So there is now the thing we're going to do now that we have our simulation running, or our color picker up and running, is we're going to demonstrate how you might have your host processor or something else attached to the Amulet hardware set the internal RAM values or display the internal RAM values. So we're going to show that communication happening in the simulation. So I'm going to launch LabVIEW, or LabVIEW is already launched, so I'm going to open up LabVIEW, and this is this LabVIEW object we have right here is just displaying a it's talking to our Amulet simulation, and it's displaying the color variable 0 that we also have set here.
So we're using a virtual COM port, and on this computer, the COM13 that you see in LabVIEW is tied up to COM12. And COM12, if you go in GEMstudio and go to the Tools menu, you can see, go ahead and go to the Tools menu and go to Options and go to the Gem Player. You can see that it's using COM12. So COM12 and 13 are linked. So when you hit OK and then run, you got to run the simulation again. And you're running the simulation. The player's talking on COM12. LabVIEW's talking on COM13. Now they're linked.
So LabVIEW is showing color variable 0, just like our simulation is.
Using the what we call our CRC communications protocol. This is a driver that's available in the LabVIEW tools network. You can, if you have LabVIEW, you can just download this it's a free plugin right from ni.com. And it implements the the LabVIEW as master, Amulet as slave version of the protocol.
Yeah, so this is the first half of our webinar, the tutorial of widgets. We are now going to move into the second half, which is the tutorial on GEMscript. We are going to do something similar in that we will be creating a color picker, but we're going to use GEMscript to make it look a lot fancier. So I'm going to go ahead and show you what we're going to create so you have an idea of where we're going. So this is what we're going to create in the second half of the webinar. We have these fancier looking sliders, and we also have a color wheel which allows you to select the color simply by dragging your finger on this wheel. So let's get started. I'm going to open up, instead of creating a new project, I'm going to open up a project we already have that has the GEMscript already written in it. So I'll go over that later, but it's going to make it less tedious, so you don't have to watch me type in the code. So GEMscript is GEMstudio Pro's programming language. It's similar syntax to JavaScript
And C.
And it allows you, it's not necessary to create a user interface, as we saw we didn't need to use it in the first half, but you can, if you do use it, you can make more complex and sophisticated designs. So to create our new color picker and make it fancier and nicer looking, we're going to go ahead and first add a background to our project. So to do that, I'm going to click the plus icon, select background, scroll down to a webinar folder that I already had the images there. I just added a 480 by 272 pixel background. Now I can't select this now that it's added to our page, which is nice. When you're moving around other widgets and clicking on things, you won't accidentally move your background, which is frustrating if you were just to add it as an image. So next thing, as you saw from our completed project, we need to add those nicer looking sliders. The widget we're going to add is not the slider, but the custom slider. So I'm going to add the custom slider in, which adds just a image, this placeholder logo, Amulet logo. The reason we have this placeholder here is that the custom slider allows you to pick your own images. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We have the channel image parameter. And an option for the handle. So I'm going to use this red button image as the handle. And there's a third parameter here, handle tracking image. I'm going to once again use the red button. You would have something different here if you wanted the handle to change images when you had it selected.
As you were dragging, like a highlight effect or something. It's pretty typical.
So actually some of the parameters for a widget when you have it selected don't show up by default. They're hidden. So we want to change some of those parameters, and to show which parameters are hidden, you can right-click on the widget and select Add Remove Parameter. And this brings up a list of all the possible parameters you can use that are available for the widget. So we want to add handle offset and href on hit only. So as you can see, our handle is a little bit high on the track, and we can modify this handle offset parameter to fix that. So I could change it to something like 5, and that would center it on the track. I'm also going to check this href on hit only box. I'll explain this a little bit more when I get to the gem script. So once again, we need 3 sliders. So I'm going to.
You want to do the href first? Or you do that later?
Yeah, I'll do the href of this slider after we talk about the gem script. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this slider for my green and blue sliders, center and fan amount. There's also another alignment option. You can treat your selection of multiple widgets as one widget and align that as if it were one unit. To do that, you just hold Shift and click your alignment button. So if I wanted to move all 3 of my sliders to the right side of the page, I would hold Shift and click Right Justify. And I could do this, keep holding Shift and move it to the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and change these to the appropriate colors.
Okay.
So I get my nice looking red, green, and blue buttons. So in the first example, we used a bar graph to display the color, but we're going to do something a little bit nicer this time. So our gem script is going to paint a colored area on our page, and so we're going to add an image to frame that color. So to do that, I'm going to click the plus icon, add in an image, one of the images from my directory, this field here. So I've been moving the sliders around by dragging or aligning them, but I know exactly where I want this field to go. So I can actually type in the coordinates I want it to be at using these fields in the bottom toolbar area. So I know I want the top of the image to be 6 pixels from the top, and I want it to be 280 pixels from the left. All right. And last thing before I jump into the GEMscript is I'm going to go ahead and change the names of my sliders. So I'm going to do that for two reasons. First of all, my slider 1, my slider 2, not very descriptive. So I'm going to change them to something meaningful like red, green, and blue. And I'm also changing these because our GEMscript references these new names in the code.
Green. That one's green.
Cool.
And GEMscript is also cap sensitive, so he's got to put the capitals on that.
And then I'm going to also change the name of our color field to color field. All right, so let's get into the GEMscript now. To get to the GEMscript, there are two ways you can get to it. It's each page has an area to type in or enter your GEMscript functions. You can get to it by right-clicking your page and going to Edit Page Functions, or you can go to Project Page Functions. So I'm going to open that, and this opens the dialog box where we type our GEMscript. So this area that's uncommented right now is what we are going to use for the first half of our GEMscript tutorial. First we declare and initialize a color variable. So color variables are 32-bit values in GEMstudio. So there are 8 bits for each red, green, and blue. And then there are also 8 bits for the alpha channel. So the alpha channel is the transparency, and we're just going to leave that completely opaque. So we have a function color slider here. This is public, so our sliders can access it, and we are going to and in the first thing we're going to do in our function is set the variables red, green, and blue to the values of our slider. So remember, we changed the slider values to red, green, and blue.
Slider names.
Slider names,
yeah.
Yes. And then we are going, since the color variable is one 32-bit value, we need to shift all 3 of those 8-bit values to the appropriate spot in that 32-bit value. And then we're going to call this function drawColor, which paints a rectangular color swatch of our color variable we've declared inside the coordinates of our color field. So I'm going to click Done because we're done with our going through our GEMscript. And last thing before we simulate, we want our sliders to call that GEMscript function we just went over. So I'm going to go to each of the hrefs of our sliders, and now GEMscript actually auto-completes because we have GEMscript functions. So we want the color slider function. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for each of these sliders.
So there's only one function, so it just automatically auto-completes that one function. There'll be more public functions later, and we can choose from different functions.
So now that we've added those, we can run our simulation and see it working. So again, we got our color sliders moving, changing the color value of our color swatch. We can see that it's setting the appropriate colors. So, but it just looks a lot nicer with these nice sliders and color field. So the last thing we're going to do is add that color wheel in that you saw in the preview. So the first thing we're going to do is add the image of the wheel. So I'm going to go to the plus icon, image, add in my color wheel image. I'll align that to the left of our project. So now this is just an image. Touching this is not going to actually change anything in our color value. We're going to need to add a widget which can accept a touch input and do something meaningful and interact with our color swatch. So the widget I'm going to add is a touch area. A touch area is an invisible rectangular area you can move around on your page, and you can assign functions to different gestures you make on the touch area. So you could have, so when you swipe on the touch area, you could have that launch one function, but if you tap, you could have that launch a different function. So I'm going to go to the plus button, highlight widgets, add the touch area widget onto our page. I want this to be the same size of our color wheel, so I'm going to change it to 272 by 272, and then align that to the left and top of our project. So now it's covering our color wheel, and we want to add those gesture capabilities. So I'm going to right click our touch area, and just like we did before, I'm going to add a parameter. So these are all the parameters or all the gestures you can use with the touch area. So there's
on the capacitive module.
Yeah, only on the capacitive module. We got multi-touch swipes, we've got taps, pinches, zooms. The gesture we want is this on auto repeat parameter. And then I'm going to add in two more that deal with that on auto repeat parameter. So now that I've added the parameters, last thing to do before we jump into the gem script again is I want some kind of indicator of where my finger has been on the touch wheel or on the color wheel. So as I'm moving my finger around and I lift it off and I want it to display whatever color I lifted off on, I want to be able to tell where my finger was. So I want a little indicator on the touch or on the color wheel. So I'm going to make use of what we already have here. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate our color field, and I'll use this as our indicator. Well, this is kind of big, and we can't really tell, say if this is moving around, exactly what color it's been highlighted. So I can just go down to these coordinates in the bottom toolbar, and I can shrink it. I want it to be 12 pixels by 12 pixels. Enter, and now we got a small, accurate indicator of where our finger has been. And I'm going to go ahead and, just like I changed the name of the color field, change the name of the indicator to color handle. Alright, so I'm going to now go back into the page functions area by going to project page functions. And I'm going to uncomment the code that was originally commented out. So this code or these functions here are going to be called whenever a touch is sensed on our touch area. So this new function we have is color chooser. So first of all, when we call color chooser with our from our touch area, we want to know if your finger is actually on the color wheel. So remember, our touch area was a square, and the touch or the color picker or the color wheel is a circle. So there is area where your finger could be on the touch area but not actually on the color wheel. So first of all, we want to check that your finger is on the color wheel, and if it is, we are going to get the color of the pixel of the current touch. So this function here is one we wrote. Basically just gets the current x and y coordinates of the current touch, and then gets the color of the pixel at those coordinates. Then we're going to call the draw color function, which is the same function we called in the first example, which just draws that color swatch. And then finally, we want our sliders to update to the correct color shown. So instead of setting our color variable to the value of the sliders, we are setting these sliders to the value of the color variable. So let's see that in action. We'll click Done. And last thing, actually, before we simulate, is we want to add that GEMscript function to our touch area. So on auto repeat, that means that whenever our finger is on the touch area, it's going to continuously execute this color chooser function.
As you hold it down.
As you hold it down. And it is going to repeat as a rate specified by the repeat rate parameter. So I want it to repeat 20 times a second which means a 50 millisecond period, and the units here are seconds, so I'm going to type 0.05 for 50 milliseconds. All right, and now we can go ahead and simulate our design to see it in action. And you can see I'm holding down the mouse button, so I'm dragging the cursor around the perimeter of our color wheel, and you can see both the color field changing to the value that the indicator is on, and the sliders are moving to the value that would also set that color. So
you can leave it open, go back to lab view.
Yeah. So once again, we can open lab view here. And I can run it again, and once again, we are still setting the color variable 0. So the lab view is pulling that variable value and showing it just like our simulation is. And as you can see, moving to the edge of the circle but still in the touch area, the indicator won't follow. So it's
thanks to Pythagorean's theorem.
That's right. And if you are interested in seeing that code, that gem script we had written, just go ahead and shoot us an email or ask us in the Skype chat message, and we will be able to email that to you.